Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese, and you're listening to episode 73, A Sisterhood of the Stars. I'm going to be interviewing my very special guest, Ruth Anne Amsden. She's a staff writer for Treksphere. We're going to be talking about how the women of Star Trek influenced her, how they helped her develop in her life and her faith. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. Don't miss this one. Stick around. All right. Well, it is time once again. If you heard last episode, you have already met my guest, who has been on the show before. She is a writer for Treksphere. She's a mom. She's a friend of mine and a friend of the show. And we are so excited. I am so excited to have her here as my guest. Welcome to the show, Ruth.
Oh, Kevin, thank you so much for inviting me. It is absolutely a delight. You know, I listen to your show the minute it drops every week. I listen while I'm doing chores, I'm washing dishes, I'm baking, cooking, cleaning. And it's just like having a conversation with a dear friend. And I so much appreciate all the work you put in every week.
Well, thank you very much. I always appreciate your listening and telling me what you think of the show. You have been with us since the first episode.
Since the time of the beginning.
Yep, since the before times. So thank you very much. I wanted to bring you on because, you know, I think I said this. I know I said this to subscribers. I don't know if I said it on the show. If you were listening to us last year at this time, you know, we were having... Yes, I know you were. If people listening to the show right now were listening to us last year at this time, you know that we were doing a series called Women's Future History, because March is Women's History Month, and we did a whole thing with cool guests and all that. And we really didn't get to do that this month, which is a good thing because we were doubling up on Star Trek episodes. We haven't been able to do a thematic episode most of the month. So we're kind of making up for that a little bit by bringing you on here to talk about your story. You did an article, which we'll link to in the description, back last October. I couldn't believe it was that long ago, for Women at Warp, which, you know, we love Women at Warp around here. They're doing good work. And you did an article talking about your background and your history, coming from a fundamentalist upbringing, and how the women of Star Trek influenced you and were an inspiration to you. So thought we'd bring you on to talk about that.
Oh, I'd love to. I can always talk about the women of Star Trek, but before I begin, I want to do a shout out to the two bravest, strongest, most loving women in my life, my mom, Susan, and my grandmother, Jody, without whom I wouldn't be here, and without whom I would not be a Star Trek fan. And I just owe them so much. And I wanted to say that any conversation about strong women in Star Trek is incomplete unless I'm talking about my mom and my grandmother, because they showed me how to be a strong woman.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thanks, Mom and Grandma. That's fantastic. Well, talk to us a little bit about that. You're alluding there to sort of the beginnings of your story. Tell us how, you know, your mom and your grandmother were important in that introduction to Star Trek, and why that was important in your life.
I come from a fundamentalist evangelical Christian background. We come from a sect so small, as Garrison Keillor said, that no one knows about us but us and God. So if you've read Lake Wobegon Days by Garrison Keillor, and you've read about the sanctified brethren that Garrison Keillor is referring to are the Ames brethren, and they're related to the sect of Christians that I grew up in. I grew up in
fascinating.
The Tunbridge Wells Plymouth brethren. In many ways, I found my way to God through the Plymouth brethren, through the sect I grew up in. There was constant exposure to scripture, to the hymnody, to prayer, to godliness in our daily lives. And in many ways, that upbringing formed and shaped me as a Christian. But there is a dark side to that fundamentalist upbringing that I think many people can attest to, that sect was very oppressive toward women. And I don't think that it was out of any sort of malice or any lack of love. I think that there was a misinterpretation of scripture that
Mm-hmm.
led to this. But however that may be, in the sect, women were not allowed a voice in sect decisions. We were not allowed a voice in the day-to-day governing, I guess, of the sect. We were not allowed to speak in church services. We were not allowed to teach or to preach in any capacity. What we could do was teach Sunday school,
Mm-hmm.
and older women could instruct younger women in how to be a good wife and mother.
Yeah.
That's what the women in my sect were allowed to do. We very, very, very much did not have a voice of our own.
How did
And
that?
from scripture, I would argue that there have been women leaders all through scripture. So I
Right.
would argue that that is a very serious misunderstanding and interpretation.
Right. I agree. And, I think it's very easy. I mean, a lot of something you said there was talking about, that it wasn't done in a way that is intentionally with malice.
Very
And
much not.
I have a sense that you're very much right about that. And I think it's difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around that,
Mm-hmm.
because we can see so much that these patriarchal narratives very much
Mm-hmm.
reinforce the power of certain people. And I
Very
think
much.
there
Yes.
is an intentionality behind that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, at least in our place in history, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the people who are perpetuating these things might not have the motivations of the people who founded these things, and
I agree with
they're
all my heart.
that they're sort of caught up in the deception as well. Even though they continue to propagate the patriarchy, they're
Mm-hmm.
heirs to it and not its
Yes.
architects. And that doesn't absolve them
Yes.
of guilt. That doesn't mean that they haven't
Mhm.
done anything wrong. It
I
does mean,
agree.
however, and I think it's an important distinction that you make, that often it is done without malice, and I think done without
Mm.
awareness of how wrong it is.
Yes. I want to make the argument. So I'm taking a course in college on the study of masculinities in America from 1950 to present. And one of the things that we've had pointed out to us is that the patriarchy, it's not individual men, it is a
Mm-hmm.
system.
Right.
Right. And so when I'm speaking about the patriarchy that I experienced growing up, that took my voice and my agency as a Christian woman, I cannot point the finger at any living or dead person,
Mm.
because all of the men that I look to as my leaders, the men that I look to who were taking the position of leadership in my sect, who claimed to speak for God,
Mm-hmm.
they were all very much men of God. They
Mm.
loved the Lord Jesus. They read the scripture. They knew the Lord, right? And they had, as far as I know, and God judges the thoughts and intents of our hearts. But as far as my ability to judge character goes, they had no malice or evil. They did what they did because they believed that they were following God's order.
Right.
And if I can be honest, I think that makes men in power very, very dangerous when they think that they are following God's order,
Mm-hmm.
and they're misinterpreting and thinking what that their understanding of God's order is actually what God wants.
Right.
And I think that's very dangerous, but I want to be very, very, very clear that I am a feminist. I will go to the mat for women's voices, for women's agency, for women's rights. But I want to be very clear that there's no one living person today that you can point the finger at and say, patriarchy is your fault.
Mm.
And I want to go on and say that I have seen in that sect, patriarchy hurts the men who are in that system as much as the women. So I want to be very clear that as a feminist, I want equality for everyone, because
Yeah.
I did not see that growing up.
Yeah. And it's very important that you say that it does hurt men. Again, not to make victims out of them in a way of, or excusing anything, because I do believe there are people with malice. I do believe there are people with malice. And I do believe that as people become aware of systems of oppression that they might be involved in, they are culpable for their participation in them.
I agree.
And so, I can't say, oh, well, it's not their fault at all. Of course it is. It's the fault of everybody. A system existing is the fault of everybody who perpetuates it. But there is a certain degree of ignorance upon which these systems continue to flourish and function.
I may
And
argue that some of that ignorance is willful ignorance. I've
yes,
seen it. I
yes,
know it.
because it's very easy when someone tells you you're supposed to be in charge and you're supposed to be the one with all the rights and the one with all the power. It's very easy to say, oh, well, that sounds good to me. It's very easy to accept that truth because it kind of strokes your ego, if you have one, that will accept that sort of thing. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's you're a little bit predisposed to accept that, no matter who you are, no matter your
It's just human nature.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. So there is a bit of that, and I think understanding that dynamic can help prevent us from vilifying people.
Yes.
But we do also need to understand that people are culpable for their actions, especially if people have brought it to their attention and shown it to them.
Yes.
They're definitely culpable for their actions and
They're
what they do
very
with that
much
information.
responsible. They will answer to God.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah.
But I do want to make the point that there are men who are in leadership, and that those men who are in leadership, they can victimize other men just as much as they can women.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it. It's broken my heart, but I've seen it. And I've also seen very strong women who are experiencing oppression and repression become twisted into using that strength to manipulate men. So I want to be very clear that when I am speaking about my experience as a woman in the sect, even though we as women experienced oppression and repression, our hands are not entirely clean either. That we need to examine ourselves before God. We may have experienced repression and oppression, but doing it back doesn't make it right.
Right. That's two wrongs don't make a right any more than two rights make a wrong. I agree with that for sure. And that's a very important point that is difficult to balance. It's difficult to balance the idea that you have to fight for your rights, you have to fight for equality, you have to hold people accountable, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't turn you into the monster you're trying to fight.
I may say it's been a very long journey for me. I've been on this journey for 12 years now? So it's taken me a long time. A lot of tears, a lot of prayers, a lot of conversation, a lot of the hard work of healing to get to the point where I'm talking to you right now. So I want to be very clear that this is not something that's easy to get to this place.
Right.
But Star Trek was a guiding light to me, and Star Trek showed me how. And
well,
thank God for Star Trek.
Hey, that's the truth. I say that all the time. I think it's a beautiful, blessing thing. So tell
Oh,
us
God's a Star
how.
Trek fan.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. God's a Star Trek fan. Yeah, you're quoting Ira Stephen Bear right there. I happen to agree
Yes.
with him. Yes. But tell us about how that happened in your life, how that came to you.
Well, my mom and my dad came to the cult when they were both young adults. So they'd had 18 plus years outside the cult to pick up a love for 60s music and 60s pop culture. Yeah, we listened to a lot of CCR growing up.
Nice.
Yes, I love CCR. And but once they joined the cult back in the 80s, there was a very strong movement to move away from popular culture, to cut
Hmm.
off from popular culture. So we did not have a television in the home. We weren't reading what we called worldly books. We were very much cut off from popular culture. We were very much a part of our own insular subculture, right?
Right.
So it's like we
Yeah.
spoke our own language. We had our own dress code. We had our own rhythm to our own lives that was very much set apart from the rest of society.
Yeah.
Not to the extent that the Amish are,
Hmm.
but comparable in many ways. So many things are off limits to us that to this day, 12 years outside of the cult, I'm still catching up on my pop culture references.
Yep.
I I know a lot about the King James Bible. You can't stick me on my Bible, but you can sure enough stick me on my pop culture references because I don't know them. But my mom, who is a hero and a rebel, was listening to Peter, Paul, and Mary in the sun porch late at night after everybody had gone to bed and nobody could tell her not to. And she was watching Star Trek late at night after everyone had gone to bed when no one could tell her not to.
But you
My
now that's
mom.
interesting, the story that she was watching Star Trek at all because you didn't have a television.
Well, my mom had this tiny, tiny little device. I don't even know what to call it anymore, but
It's
it like
oh
had a television
yeah.
band and it was a radio thing,
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I know this.
right? And she had that thing hidden in her corner over by her chair. She's put her knitting on top of it, right? She would get that out late at night and she would watch Star Trek because she grew up with the original series. She loved
Mm.
that. So my introduction to Star Trek was my mom using that TV band, a cassette tape recorder, and a Memorex audio cassette, and taping the audio of Deep Space Nine episodes.
That's awesome.
That's how I came to Star Trek, folks.
You never know. You never know. Will Wheaton was talking on the most recent Ready Room about coming to Star Trek through the albums.
I
Well, with the
freaked.
books. Is
I
that great? I thought
absolutely
of you.
freaked. Because once I had my foot in the door as a Trekkie, now
Hmm.
this is before the term Niner was even invented because that
Right?
episode had not yet aired. We're
Right?
talking first season Deep Space Nine, baby. But to get back to the influence of women in
Hmm.
Star Trek on my life, I want you to try and picture this. I had never in my life seen a woman in leadership.
Mm.
I had never seen a woman treated as an equal partner to a man.
Hmm.
I had never seen a woman like being angry and speaking out and being heard and respected and not silenced.
Mm.
So you can guess that when I first heard Deep Space Nine, Major Kira Nerys
Wow.
was where it was at.
Yes.
Because she is an incredibly strong, powerful woman.
Mhm.
But at the same time, she has a tender side. She's a woman of faith.
Yep.
She's a woman who can admit when she's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but she's a very powerful leader.
How did that affect you as you're meeting Kira, and she's doing her stuff, and she is a person of faith, and her dynamic, her relationship with her religion, right?
Mm,
She has her faith, but she also has her religion, and
mm,
there's Belial, but there's also
mm.
Win, and there's also
Yeah.
Opaka, as all these
Yes.
leaders in her religious community, and how she works out from the strictness of her faith at the beginning of the
Mhm.
series and how she opens up as the series goes on. Did you pick up on those things as you were listening as a kid?
I think I was too young to understand intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of an intuitive thing for me, something that I internalized, that I grew into.
Mm.
But I may say that growing up in the sect that I did, I knew women like Vedic Win,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
That dynamic of who Win is, that is very, very familiar. Because if I'm honest, being the kind of spiritual woman that Win is, was the only way that some women in the sect could experience power,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
some of them, just as Win did, use that power for their own self interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I very much related to that. The everything that we love to hate about Win, it's very real to me.
Yeah.
The fake hypocrisy, the false piety. In my culture, in my sect growing up, it was very much of a competitive piety. Everyone was trying to out pious everyone else to show off how pious we were. And when
Mm-hmm.
I saw Kira Nerys, a woman of faith who wasn't the least bit pious, but who believed with all her heart and who wished she could believe more, I knew that I had found a role model as a woman of faith who wasn't false about it. She was very, very real about
Mm-hmm.
it. And to this day, Kira is a tremendous role model to me in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah, she's an incredible character, and it means so much to see that aspect of her character, and so many aspects of her character. I mean, what
Mm,
what an introduction to powerful women. Nerys
very
is
much. Nerys
Nerys
is all
is
of that.
yeah, she is indomitable. And and how did that so I find it interesting that it's,
Mm.
again, it's your mom who brings these things to you. I mean, what a beautiful picture that is. What a beautiful picture your mom is to you, giving you
Yes.
this gift.
Mm. So much more, so much. So my mom and I used to nerd out. Well, we still do, right? We
Yeah.
still do. But it began when I was 10 and 11. And that can be a time in, the period of a woman's relationship with her mom that can be a bit of a struggle. But
Mhm.
we had Star Trek. And it was something that we shared, that we had in common, that we could talk about and nerd out together. And my mom and I each used to write our own versions of fan fiction in our notebooks, and we didn't really share it with each other, but we knew that we were writing fan fiction,
Mm.
and we could quote episodes to each other.
Oh.
And then bringing in my grandmother, we used to visit. We were very close with my grandmother, so we used to go up and visit my grandmother, you know, spend a few days with her. And this is back when Next Generation was on the air. So
Yeah.
you can imagine for a young girl like me what it was like for me getting to see the next generation on television
Mm,
and seeing professional, powerful, wise, strong women like Deanna Troy and Dr. Beverly Crusher.
yep.
I do understand and I do agree that there are certain criticisms with the way that those women were presented on Next Generation. But I want to say that imperfect as that representation was, it made a profound and lasting impact on 11-year-old me
Yes.
to see Tiana Troy as an immensely tender-hearted woman, as an empathetic woman who had such an important role as advisor and interpreter to the captain of a starship. The captain was making decisions based on information that Deanna Troy was giving him. Can
Yeah.
you imagine what that
Yeah.
was like for me, who had
Hmm.
never seen, a woman's voice or perspective heard and acted upon to that extent. And to see Beverly Crusher, able to call Picard out when he
Yes.
was in the wrong and be able to say, Jean-Luc, that's not a good direction that you're going in. To be able to see her have the power and respect to do that, that was something I simply didn't see growing up. Now, did I understand when I was 11 what I was seeing and what I was internalizing? No, I
Mm.
certainly didn't. All I really cared about was the comm badges and the tricorders because that was cool. And I was a girl nerd, big time.
Right.
Now, I was a girl nerd back in the 80s when it was not the thing to be a nerd at
Right.
all. And
Right.
especially not a girl nerd, and especially not a fundamentalist Christian girl nerd. It
Right.
was it was unheard of. It was not
Right.
the thing. So I was a closeted Trekkie for many years. I didn't really understand the effect that this was having on me, but it was having a profound effect. I used to I used to cosplay Dr. Crusher and Deanna Troy
Oh.
and Kira Nerys and Jadzia Dax. I used to cosplay them at 11 years old. I used to take construction paper and cut out shapes of comm badges and tape them to my dress.
That's
And I used
wonderful.
to make, so Nerys was such an inspiration to me. I used to make like a Bajoran nose out of construction paper. I used to just tape that right on my face. And I was like, yeah, I'm Kira.
That's
That was my
wonderful. Of
cosplay because I couldn't afford, the gadgets or the uniforms or anything. I couldn't
course.
afford that. We grew up poor.
Well,
We're old poor, so I couldn't afford that. But construction paper was where it was at.
yes, yes. I having devised many things growing up myself, I completely relate to that. Absolutely.
Which
And
leads me to my next very useful use for construction paper.
okay, yes.
We were very, very much in the closet about being Trekkies because if my dad found out that we were into Star Trek, it was all over. Because my
Mm,
dad was very, very, very much rooted in the cult, in the sect, and he was very much phobic about Star Trek. He thought it was atheistic. He thought it was satanic.
mm,
So back in those days, um, we thought the Mormon Tabernacle Choir was satanic.
mm.
Okay. We thought Shakespeare was satanic. We thought CCR was satanic. We thought everything was satanic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Everything that wasn't part of our culture was part of the world,
Hmm.
and it was to be hated and feared and avoided. But my mom had wisdom.
Yeah,
She had wisdom to say, this is not bad. This is a very good thing. Star Trek is a very good thing.
yeah.
And it's fun and we can enjoy it, but don't let your father know about it. So I used to take pages of construction paper and cover up the covers of the Star Trek novels
Oh,
so that
wow.
I could read that novel whenever I wanted and not be afraid that I would be found out. So I used to think green was my favorite color for construction paper. And I used to take and cover those books right over with construction paper.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I
That's
used to
wonderful.
have back in the day, when so what we have to understand is I'm talking about the 80s and early 90s when Star Trek was having a heyday. So
Yes.
you could walk into Walden Books.
Hmm.
Remember Walden Books?
Oh yeah.
And you could get like Star Trek bookmarks with all the characters on it,
Hmm.
and you could get blank journals with Star Trek covers.
Hmm.
I had one that had Spock on the cover. I had another one with the Enterprise D on the cover, and I had another one with Deep Space Nine space station on the cover. So I used to get those, and I would cover them over with construction paper,
Mm.
and I'd write my journals in those. And I can remember writing about the episodes of Star Trek that I was listening to or the novels that I was reading. And
That's
on those
awesome.
very special occasions when I was watching Star Trek at my grandmother's, I'd write about what episodes I watched back then. And
Oh, that's wonderful. How was it? What is it like for you? You talk about all these little items that you were able to get at the bookstore and things. You know, for the longest time, you only heard Deep Space Nine. I mean, what was that transition like from like just imagining all these characters to then finally learning, oh, that's what Nerys looks like. That's what Benjamin looks like.
oh, I should be happy to explain. So I'm wondering if you remember the old Star Trek magazines that we used to be able to get.
Oh,
We used to be
yes.
able to walk into Walden Books every month and get a new one.
Mhm. Now Star Trek
So
Explorer, it's out there now.
yes, Explorer, Starlog, the official magazine. So we used to walk in, we used to get Star Trek Fan Club was another one I remember from the 90s that I
Mm.
used to get. And so we used to get those every month. So there you could get the synopsis of the episodes. You got interviews with the writers, with the cast,
Hmm.
with the producers. Um, I vividly remember an interview with Michael Piller. So this is going along
Oh,
ways
yeah.
back. And you got synopses of the episodes. So you could see loads and loads of pictures. So you knew what everybody looked like. You knew their facial expressions. And then you would take and you would put those magazines, those images that you had in your head from the magazines, you would take and put those together with the audio that you
Yeah.
were getting. And at the time that I was doing that, I was also listening to a lot of the novels on cassette.
Hmm.
So the old novels on cassette were very, very much abridged, but they had the advantage of being read by the actors themselves. A lot of the actors of that time,
Hmm.
Jonathan Frakes, Leonard Nimoy, George Takei, um, I believe even Majel Barrett, did a lot
Yeah.
of voice work. And so they would record those abridged versions of the audiobooks and layered over and with the voices of the actors was the classic sounds of Star Trek, the turbo lift doors, the red alert, the phasers,
Hmm.
um, the background bridge sounds. All of that was there in those audiobooks. So I had to take those novels, take what I read, take what I listened to, and take and visualize that. So I've often thought that this made me, I was already a creative person at this time in my life.
Hmm.
I was already a writer at this time in my life. But I will argue that not having quite the visuals that we have today made me a more creative person, certainly made me more book text oriented.
Hmm. So it really probably helped you understand how language conveys story in
Very much.
verbal
I
ways. Yeah.
internalized the the rhythms, the patterns, the structures of story because I listened to it, I internalized it. It was part of my daily life.
Hmm.
I was constantly reading. So when I sat down to write, it came very natural to me because I had internalized so many books, so many
Yeah.
novels.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that that's how the depth of my knowledge of Star Trek came from the novels. There's so many deep cuts in the novels. I'm thinking right now about Strangers from the Sky. There are so many
Mm.
Easter egg references in Strangers from the Sky by Margaret Wanda Bonanno.
Hmm.
There was a deep cut reference to John Gill and the Dove Society. There were deep cut references to The Final Reflection, another novel. Deep cut references to so many of the episodes of the original series. And this was also the case with another very formative book from that period of my life, Prime Directive by Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens.
Hmm.
There were so many references to the Greek god Apollo
Right.
and Nomad and all of those events that I knew about those events before I ever saw the episodes. I saw the episodes of the original series as an adult. So here I am as an adult watching the episodes of the original series, putting it all together. Oh, when Margaret Wander Bonanno said that Spock understood the loneliness of a woman exiled in a world of ice, I did not know until I was like 28 years old. That was Zarabeth. All right.
Wow. That's great.
It's so awesome. So awesome.
So you're coming at Star Trek from this sort of different route, this different way, and
Very much.
in this at the same time, you're sort of coming to your sense as a woman by this different route through in part through Star Trek, and
Yeah.
you're coming to your now fully embraced feminist views
Very
through this
much.
point, and of course your faith is changing too as you grow up. You talk about, early on not really necessarily fully understanding all the things that were sinking in.
Mm.
When do you start to get it? When do you start to put these pieces together? How does this experience with Star Trek and experience as you grow up in your culture begin to shape you as a person in a more conscious way?
Well, my children's father, my ex-husband, was very much a part of that. I may just say that I still love him very much. We're not married anymore, but we're still family. Still
Yeah.
love him very much. He's still been, a real impact on my life. And he was able to be an outsider who could give me an outsider perspective.
Mm.
But what I did, because I had been trained to do this, was that I just adopted all of his views and outlook and perspective because I had been trained as a woman that I couldn't think for myself. I had to be guided by first my father and then my husband.
Mm.
So I very much did that. But as a background to this, um, guided by the maleness in my life, I had a very strong role model in my grandmother. My grandmother taught me to grapple and wrestle with one's faith
Mm.
as no one else in my life has done. My grandmother taught me to reject what was false in our faith, but to embrace what was true. And she did that for me by example,
Mm.
by grappling and wrestling where I could have those long heart to heart conversations with her. And I'm so thankful because she was the guiding, shining light that led me so that when I was separated from my husband and I was having to learn to think for myself, to have agency as a woman, to have agency apart from the men, the leaders, the fathers, the guiding men in my life. When I became a single woman, I came out of the sect and I came out of that marriage, and Star Trek was there for me.
Mm.
Star Trek had been, I thought, just this nerdy, fun thing that I loved when I was a child. And I thought that when I became a woman and I went off to college, got into the workforce, had became, a married woman with children and, began to live my life as an adult, I felt that Star Trek was something that was childish that I had left behind.
Yeah.
But in the time in my life when I had lost all the things that were like compasses pointing me north, like I had lost my marriage, I had lost my grandmother, I had lost my sect.
Mm.
Star Trek was right there waiting for me with open arms. And the way I came back to Star Trek after 20 years away was a friend of mine said, "Oh, I know you're a Trekkie. I know you really like the Star Trek novels because we talk a lot about, the books we read growing up. I've got this couple of boxes of Star Trek books. Can
Oh,
I
wow.
send them to you? I want to give them a good home." And I said, "Sure, sure." My friend sent me those books. This is 3 years ago. I plunged wholeheartedly right back into Star Trek, and I've been there ever since. So we are talking the novels from the 80s. We are talking Camp City, right? We are talking fanfic. We are talking a novel where Commander Spock, goes off to be a pirate. I mean, we are talking camp, but I loved it. Oh my goodness, I loved it. And from there, I said, well, I want to see what all the fuss is about. So from there, I started watching the original series.
Mm.
I came to know the crew of the original series through the movies, through the films when I was
Mm-hmm.
11. So I watched all of the films at my grandmother's when I was a kid. And talk about inspiring women. Uhura was
Yeah.
that to me.
Oh,
She was
yes.
she was my favorite when I was 11 years old. I wanted to be Uhura. Right. When I was 11 years old and I watched the motion picture and
Mm-hmm.
I was watching Uhura as a professional woman, so calm and so essential to that crew in the face of this danger, I wanted to be her.
Oh, wow.
I am
That's
sitting
wonderful.
right next to it now, but my grandmother had a coffee table and I used to sit. I used to pull up a little chair my size. I was 11 years old. Pull up that chair, that coffee table. I used to pretend that coffee table was my communications console, and I was a hura. That's what a nerd I was.
Oh, that's beautiful. I just love that.
And
You know,
coming back to Star Trek as an adult after 20 years away, I said, I feel just the same way about it now, only more so. It
yeah.
is even more beautiful. It is even more nerdy. It is even more inspiring to
Yeah.
me. There are a number of characters that I loved when I was a kid
Mm-hmm.
that I fully came to appreciate and cherish as an adult woman, as a single woman, finding her way to feminism. And I found my way to feminism through the women of Star Trek.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Who are some of the other characters besides the ones you've talked about who you might want to
Captain
mention?
Janeway. She's my captain.
Oh, come on now.
Tuvix or no Tuvix, I would follow her into hell.
Even a year of hell.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I just followed her into a year of hell because I wasn't going to leave her side.
Right.
She's my captain. Because once again, so a little backstory on how I came to Voyager. Once
Mm-hmm.
again, I didn't have access to television growing up, so I had never seen an episode.
Right.
But I came to Voyager once again through the novels. I
Mm.
had the novelization of Caretaker. So I had Caretaker, the first novel, had photo inserts
Oh,
from the
nice.
pilot. So I had all kinds of photographs. So I knew who everyone was, what they looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And I collected the Voyager novels. And, I read through the synopses in the magazines. So that was my introduction to Voyager. And I read Jerry Taylor's biography of Janeway when it first came out back in 97, I believe. And that was called Mosaic. And so that was how I came to Janeway as a female leadership role model, something I had never seen growing up. And Janeway was that to me. And you can imagine what it means to me that she's come back to Star Trek, to Prodigy, and that I can share that with my son. Like, here is a woman who was a role model to me as a strong female leader, and my kid gets to see that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. That's pretty beautiful.
Mm.
And it's incredible to me to see how important all this is in laying a groundwork that, both in Star Trek itself and in your relationship to your mom and your grandmother sort of through it, that there's an undercurrent or a rooting there that happens
Very
that
much.
comes to flourishing later in life. I mean, that's
Very much.
very, very much the kind of thing that happened with me growing up as a Star Trek fan as a kid or as a teenager, going away from it for a while and coming back to it with new worldview lenses on and seeing Star Trek in a whole new way. And so it's reminding me, I'm gonna call back to this week's Picard a little bit, but don't worry, listeners, it's not a spoiler for the episode. But in the Ready Room, episode for this week's Picard, they Will interviewed Leah Thompson, and I'm just drawn to her words about understanding or learning just in the past couple of years through the pandemic and everything, saying to Will, it's really important what we do. Like, people can be depressed and alone at home, and they can turn on a film, they can turn on a television series and be transported and be helped by that it can be profoundly impactful and profoundly effective for someone to see in an era where women, at least on screen, are so much leading in Star Trek, both on screen and behind the scenes, and to have one of those women talking about the importance of the stories that we tell and the importance of the work that is done in creating these things for people. It just makes me think of you and so many other people who have been so strongly influenced by this. That must have been a great moment for you to see that interview with her and to have that.
It was very meaningful to me. I had tears in my eyes, I'll be honest. But speaking of Leah Thompson and the 2 episodes of Picard that she just directed, I wanted to make my final connection that one of the most powerful of all the women in Star Trek was Dr. Gillian Taylor from the Voyage Home. And I'd like to tell you why. Dr. Gillian Taylor was a very professional, very strong woman from my time. What Dr. Taylor showed me is that I had a place in Star Trek. If Gillian, who is very much a woman of our time, who is recognizable to me, could take and find a home in the Star Trek future, so could I. And it took tremendous strength to do what Gillian did, to leave behind her whole world, everything that she knew, and go forward into the future with Captain Kirk and his crew. And to a lesser extent, I did that when I left the cult, when I left my marriage, when I said, I want to live as a follower of Christ, but not in this context that is not healthy for me as a woman, that is not allowing me to have a voice as a woman of God. Right?
Yeah.
And like the women of Star Trek seem to be standing at my side saying, we are strong women. You're a strong woman. You can do this. I know I've had struggles and issues with Michael Burnham and the way that she has been written, particularly in the first 2 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to see what a tremendous role model to me that she has become.
Oh, yeah.
That she has become a leader that I can follow, that I can draw strength, inspiration from. Because she's had such a growth arc. Michael has taught me that we can mess up big time, really, foul up and mess up, but that there's redemption for us.
Yeah.
That we can go on to learn and grow and change and make a difference. Michael is that role model to me. And that we can have a healthy, nurturing, nourishing relationship without giving up any of our power, without giving up any of our agency, without giving up our voice, without giving up who we are. Michael is showing me that.
Yeah.
Because so many times in feminism, we can almost feel, oh, we can be strong, independent women, or we can be in a relationship. We can't be both. And I would argue that we absolutely can be. And that we all need companionship. We all need friendship. We all need connection.
Yeah.
And Michael's strong connections with close friends, with book, with mentors, is showing me that's the way to be a strong woman.
Yes. Strength doesn't mean being an island.
No.
Strength means being able to lean on each other. And I mean, I think Discovery shows us that so well.
Discovery is shining.
Yeah,
it has
beautiful.
been such a burning and a shining light to me that Michael, as a strong woman in leadership, can turn to Saru.
Yeah.
Right? Can turn to Telly. Can turn to President Rolick.
Yeah.
And say, I need your guidance. I need your wisdom.
Yeah.
Without giving up any of her power. But she can lean on them. Right? It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's absolutely a role model to me.
Yeah. And look at the way, too, that Star Trek has grown. Because as I hear you telling these stories about loving Uhura or loving Gillian Taylor or whatever, I think, of course you're drawn to them as fellow women. That's something that you needed and something that you were looking for, something that struck you as a type of woman you'd never seen before. But think about that these characters are not the center of the show, not the focus of the show, and don't have as much to do in the story as a lot of the men do. And yet in today's Star Trek, we were just talking last episode or a couple episodes ago about, the president of the Federation who is a woman, greets the president of Earth, who is a woman of color, who refers to her general, who is a woman of color, who goes to talk to the captain of our show, who's a woman of color. We've got people like Oo and Kayla, who are amazing. There's so many great women, not just in smaller roles, but in larger roles too. They're everywhere. What a beautiful time. Yeah.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And they're equals and they're respected and they are very good role models.
Yeah. And they make mistakes and they do wrong things and they
show vulnerability.
Yes. And yet they still are striving. They still are heroes, and that's what's so beautiful.
And they depend on each other and they lean on each other.
Yes.
We were talking in the last episode about women supporting women. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. Well, humans supporting humans is a beautiful thing. And I mean, in the same sense that I was talking with Mike, I don't know, last episode, couple of episodes ago, I was talking with him about balance and that balanced characters, to keep something in balance, you have to move, that characters who are strong, characters who are admirable aren't necessarily the people who always do the right thing all the time. I never met a paragon, but
they learn from that.
Yeah.
That's what has been so striking to me
Yeah.
As they can take those things, those mistakes, those vulnerabilities, and learn from them.
Yes. Yes.
Like, I was very much struck that President Ruach has been really showing us what strong female leadership looks like. But Michael encouraged her and said, we are all we have out here in space. It's okay to lean on us. It's okay to open up to us. It's okay to reach out and say, I'm worried about people that I love. I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time. Can you be there for me?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's a beautiful thing. And I'm seeing that in Star Trek today, the way I never saw it growing up. Growing up, we did not see the friendships between Jadzia and Kira Nerys developed. We did not see the friendships between Dr. Crusher and Counselor Choi developed the way that we're seeing friendships between women develop today. I'm actually on deadline to write an article about this very topic for Women at Warp on the female friendships and discovery and how beautiful that is.
That's beautiful, and it's very true. I think there's such a richness that is being introduced, to Star Trek, and in ways that haven't been before. It's just beautiful to see that we can go all the way back to the original series. We can go to Next Generation, and we can critique the ways that women were portrayed. We can critique a lot of things, that we think,
we can. And I
they
do.
weren't quite there. Yeah, I know you do. And well, we weren't quite there yet. But at the same time, those strivings, man, where would you be without them?
I don't want to think where I would be without any of them.
Yeah.
I just don't. Because much as I criticize the original series, there were some strong women characters who were treated very well in that series. And I do grieve and mourn that Uhura was not given the part that she deserves. But then you come over to the animated series and you see Uhura in charge,
right,
of in command for the first time. Then you go over to the animated series and you see Dr. Sarah April as a pioneer of space medicine, who was so influential that McCoy is fangirling all over her, saying, Dr. Sarah April created all of these tools and all of these procedures that I use every day in my sick bay.
Yeah.
So I would argue that the animated series did a little bit better for women than the original series.
I agree. Well, it was almost 10 years later, so we had some advances in culture too. So, but that's fantastic. I love it, and I love to think of how Uhura too is getting to grow and change. We can talk another time about Uhura in the Kelvin timeline and how she's going to grow in the Strange New Worlds. It's just so fascinating and so wonderful to listen to your story. I love hearing what Star Trek means to people. I love stories of people, and this is what I love about your story, being able to rescue your identity from the one that's been placed on you, to extract your faith, to extract your womanhood, to extract your sense of self from the religion and the culture and the context in which you came, to be able to keep the good stuff and strain out the bad. That's a hard thing for people to do. And
it's been a long journey.
And I'm proud of you for doing that. I applaud you for doing that. And of course, we're all still on the journey, but
very much.
It's hard for a lot of people to do that. It's hard for a lot of people to leave something so intrinsic to them, but retain good stuff from it. And I just hope that your story is an example to people out there who may be struggling with similar things.
I hope so too.
Well, Ruth, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
It's been a delight.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being in the background supporting us for all these years. And well, not all these years, but all these episodes. This couple of years that we've been doing this. Thank you for being a friend to us and for being on the show. And
thank you.
And tell our audience where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter very often, but if I am, you'll find me at Fringed Gentian. And I'm a staff writer for Treksphere. And I do a lot of character studies, book reviews, think pieces, thematic pieces on the episodes, where I take and do a deep dive into the themes and how they relate to our world today. And I'm also a guest writer occasionally for Women at Work. And I have another article coming out in another month. Looking forward to that.
Fantastic. We're looking forward to that too. Thank you so much for being here. So I hope everyone enjoyed that wonderful conversation with Ruth. If you didn't hear our previous episode on the most recent episode of Star Trek Picard, go back and check that out. Next week, we will be talking about season 2, episode 5 of Star Trek Picard. Can you believe it? We will be halfway through the season. I'm amazed, and I'm looking forward to that episode. I hope you are as well. And in the meantime, please like, comment, and share. And if you like what you're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about the show and let us know how we're doing. Also, send us your feedback and your questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can send us email at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your feedback on the show. Also, you can now support the show by subscribing. You'll get early access to each week's topical episode, plus outtakes and bonus content. Just click the subscribe button wherever you listen. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Ruth, for being here too. Until next time, I'm Kevin C. Neese, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.